That's it. Saudi Arabia's trick of discounting its oil worked. India has completely given up on Russian oil and is actively negotiating to buy black gold from Middle Eastern countries. Indian refineries are massively rejecting Russian oil for December deliveries. The 5 largest Indian refineries, which accounted for 2/3 of Russian oil imports this year, have not placed a single order for Russian crude for next month. And at the same time, these same companies are making new deals with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Moreover, the volume of these deals suggests that India is completely switching from Russian to Middle Eastern oil. Fortunately, Saudi Arabia gave India good discounts. But that's not all. When the West stopped buying Russian energy resources, China and India became the main buyers of its crude oil, while Brazil became one of the main consumers of its petroleum products, specifically diesel. But now Brazil has also announced a sharp reduction in its purchases of Russian diesel. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, it was announced that Russia has accumulated millions of barrels of unsold oil due to United States sanctions. And no one understands what to do with them now. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and be sure to write any detailed comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it says exactly that. Support the Alexei Pichi channel. Choose any format that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you provide. So, Bloomberg reports today that Indian oil refineries are massively refusing Russian oil for December deliveries due to United States sanctions. The 5 largest Indian oil refineries, which accounted for 2/3 of Russian oil imports this year, have not placed a single order for Russian crude for next month. And this means that Russia's oil supplies to India in December are sharply decreasing by 65%. And it's important to note here that usually deals for deliveries for the next period are closed by the 10th of the current month. Today is already November 11th, and the 5 largest refineries in India have not placed a single order for Russian oil for December. This shift happened after Trump doubled tariffs on all Indian imports to 50% in August, and then imposed sanctions against the 2 largest Russian producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. And now Bloomberg notes that only 2 refiners, Indian Oil and Nayara Energy, have purchased slightly larger volumes of Russian oil for December. But now essentially they risk being isolated by the European Union, since the European Union has imposed its own sanctions. Let me briefly remind you that if absolutely any oil refinery in the world has processed even a single batch of Russian oil in the past 60 days, then Europe will stop buying any petroleum products like gasoline and diesel from that refinery. India, as you understand, will not be left without oil, and here we have to admit that Trump's sanctions worked. Refining companies from India have started negotiations with the largest oil-producing countries in the Middle East to replace Russian oil, which has come under American sanctions. As Bloomberg reported today, top managers of state-owned Indian oil refineries met with representatives of Saudi Aramco and Abu Dhabi National Oil. State oil companies of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which together produce more than 13 million barrels of oil per day. The negotiations took place on the sidelines of the energy conference in Abu Dhabi last week. And interestingly, Middle Eastern producers gave guarantees to the Indians. And now let me remind you what happened after that meeting between the Indians and the Saudis last week. I released a separate episode on this topic on this YouTube channel, and I sincerely regret it. If you had watched it, you'd already know where things are going. So let me briefly remind you. The thing is, 4 days ago, right after meeting with officials from India, Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, announced that it is lowering the prices of all its oil grades for its Asian clients. The price of the Saudi-grade Arab Light for December delivery will be reduced by $1 to $2 per barrel, and now it will be sold at a premium of $1 to the Oman-Dubai benchmark. In addition, the same discounts of $1 to $2 per barrel have been set for the Arab Extra Light and Arab Super Light grades. Well, the prices for the heavy oil grades Arab Medium and Arab Heavy will drop by $1 to $4 per barrel. To clarify, this only applies to contracts signed in December, and in December, India suddenly stops buying Russian oil and switches to Middle Eastern oil. And then, just 4 days ago, I already mentioned that the price reduction by Saudi Arabia is a clear invitation to Indian oil refineries to buy their oil as a replacement for Russian barrels. And now we finally get confirmation that India is actually replacing Russian oil with Middle Eastern oil. Well, let's reinforce this once again. Following American sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, India's 5 largest oil refiners are halting all purchases from Russia. These are Reliance Industries, Bharat Petroleum, Hindustan Petroleum, Mangalore, and Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited Metal Energy. As a result, they did not purchase a single batch for December, which is the month when the United States sanctions finally come into force. In December, the Saudis are discounting oil and India is already negotiating. And as I mentioned earlier, only 2 companies in India are currently buying Russian oil. But why didn't they follow the example of others? Aren't they afraid of sanctions? And here everything is very simple. 2 companies are still buying Russian oil. The state-owned company Indian Oil, which simply wants to close its remaining deals and exit, and the company Nayara Energy. And here's where it gets most interesting. The thing is, Nayara Energy is owned by Rosneft, which is already under strict sanctions. They have nothing to lose. That this company relies entirely on Russian oil. But those companies that still want to operate, those 5 that I mentioned above, in October, they already increased their raw material purchases from Saudi Arabia by 87%, and now they're switching completely to its oil. Consequently, Russian oil producers are stockpiling unsold volumes. And according to Bloomberg, at the beginning of November, the volume of Russian oil that got stuck at sea reached 382 million barrels. It's worth explaining what is meant here. For example, Reuters reports about 2 tankers carrying about 1.5 million barrels of Urals crude oil on board, which were forced to anchor near the Suez Canal and turned into floating storage units. And there are a lot of such loaded tankers right now, and none of them can unload their oil anywhere. Consequently, there is nowhere to load newly extracted oil in Russia. Even the shadow fleet has now stopped. These oil tankers are loaded but forced to stand still. And those 2 mentioned tankers stopped at sea back on October 24th, right after the United States sanctions were imposed, because the buyers simply refused to purchase this oil. And since then, for more than 2 weeks now, these tankers have just been sitting at sea. And I'll say it again, at the beginning of November, the volume of Russian oil sitting on tankers at sea reached 382 million barrels. No one needs these barrels now, so they'll have to be sold at a discount or even a loss, just to unload it somewhere, so that someone would take it and process it. Because tankers can't stay at sea forever, and Russia keeps producing oil, it has to be shipped somewhere. It's also worth noting that Russians now face issues selling oil and petroleum products, not just crude oil. If China and India became the main buyers of Russia's crude oil after the West refused its energy resources, then one of the main consumers of petroleum products, specifically diesel, was Brazil. But now Brazil has also decided to cut back on purchases. Up until today, Brazil received about 60% of its diesel supplies specifically from Russia. But in October, right after the United States imposed sanctions, this share dropped to 17%, and the process is ongoing. There are a few key points here. Exports of petroleum products to Brazil are carried out from Baltic ports, where about 40% of the supplied volumes come from Rosneft and Lukoil refineries. That is, companies Trump sanctioned in October. And in addition, Brazil has openly stated that the volume of diesel purchases from Russia will continue to decline, since Russia has ceased to be a reliable supplier of petroleum products after a series of attacks by Ukrainian drones on oil refineries in Russia. And who do you think Brazil has now agreed to buy more diesel from to replace the Russian supply? That's right, from the United States. The sanctions are working, which is the issue here. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye.